Tonight is the night. This is the night that we get into the story of David and Goliath. This is probably one of the most well-known stories around the world throughout history is the story of David and Goliath. Even people that aren't Christians that probably have never cracked a Bible, they've heard of the story of David and Goliath. It's used in examples, illustrations. It's used as a common phrase, David versus Goliath. People that don't even know the Bible use it and know it and talk about it. This story is of epic proportions. It's like the greatest, it's like a story that couldn't be made in Hollywood, but unlike Hollywood, it is a true story. This actually happened. This was part of David's life where David defeated the champion of Gath, Goliath the giant. And it's just awesome. I think this story is so meaningful to so many people for a couple reasons. Obviously, there's just the bare facts of the story that are impressive, but it symbolizes our ability to overcome impossible situations. I think when people hear this story, it symbolizes the underdog, the person that no one thought could do it, no one had faith in, no one had confidence in, and yet he overcame an impossible situation. And naturally, people hear that story and they go, well, if David, this little shepherd boy, could do it, maybe I can do it. And it gives hope. And that's not the point of the story necessarily. The story is just a factual story, but there's so much hope in the story because if God could use David to accomplish something impossible, then we think, well, maybe God could use me to accomplish something impossible. And so when we are facing giants in our own life, we go, you know what? I serve the same God David did. We just kind of get that fire in our gut and we go, I serve the same God David did. I can overcome this giant. I can defeat this with God's help. The same God David put his trust in is the same God I'm putting my trust in. And so maybe I can see similar results as what David saw. So it puts hope in us. I think the other part of the story that's so inspiring is the courage that David had. That while all these other men were afraid and they were backing down, just the boldness and the courage that David said, and really the lack of fear for his own life to stand up and say, hey, I'll fight the giant. I'm not afraid of him. It gives us courage. I think this story inspires courage in those who are kind of weak-kneed and they're needing a little bit of push and to say, hey, where's your boldness? Where's your backbone to stand up and face the difficult things in your life? We read this story and you can't help but go, man, I'm a weenie. I need to step up and get the job done, You can't help but see that when you read this story, that there might be things in my life that I'm not facing, that I'm being intimidated by, that I'm cowering down to, that I need to stand up and face. And we get that from this story. So as we know from last week, David was already in the house of King Saul. He's playing the harp for him. He's in the throne room. He's traveling back and forth from his father's house. He's spending some time with King Saul. He's at home some. And so in chapter 17 is where our story picks up tonight. The Philistines have gathered their army on one side of the valley. The Israelites are gathered on the other side of the valley. And it's a standoff. And no one is advancing. No one's moving forward. And in verse 3, it says, so the Philistines and Israelites faced each other on opposite hills with the valley between them. Then Goliath, a Philistine champion from Gath, came out of the Philistine ranks to face the forces of Israel. He was over 9 feet tall. He wore a bronze helmet, and his bronze coat of mail weighed 125 pounds. He also wore bronze leg armor, and he carried a bronze javelin on his shoulder. The shaft of his spear was as heavy and thick as a weaver's beam, tipped with an iron spearhead that weighed 15 pounds. His armor-bearer walked ahead of him carrying a shield. Goliath stood and shouted a taunt across to the Israelites. "Why are you all coming out to fight?" he called. "I am the Philistine champion, but you are only the servants of Saul." Choose one man to come down here and fight me. If he kills me, then we will be your slaves. But if I kill him, you will be our slaves. I defy the armies of Israel today. Send me a man who will fight me." When Saul and the Israelites heard this, they were terrified and deeply shaken. This went on for 40 days. And as you can imagine, no one had the courage to go down and fight this 9-foot tall giant. And by the way, this was not just an extra tall guy. Okay, this is a real giant. The Bible talks about giants. It talks about the Nephilim. It talks about a race of people that had, above average strength and size. You can even tell from the armor, the weights that are given of the spear and the shield, that this is not just a tall guy. He's carrying some massive weight here because of his superior strength and size. So no one wanted to face him. For 40 days, he goes out, he taunts the people of Israel, he taunts God. And so David was going back and forth from the king's house. He's not actually heard the taunt yet. But around day 40, David actually sees Goliath for the first time, and he hears him taunt God and taunt the armies of Israel. So something rises up in David. He says, "I'm going to fight this giant. I'm going to fight this Goliath. I can do this." Well, his brothers hear about it, and they mistake it for just arrogance and really ignorance. Like, you're an idiot. You don't even know. You're not even a man of war. You don't know what you're doing. You've been in the field with the sheep. You don't know what you're doing. You're just arrogant, and you're foolish, and you're ignorant. But actually, he was full of faith. And what they were seeing in him, they didn't realize it was actually his confidence in God. He wasn't confident in himself as much as God had been with him. God had proved himself to him over and over again in the field. And he knew that God would be with me in attacking this Philistine. So he went and told Saul. He said, "I want to fight this guy." In verse 32, he says, "Don't worry about this Philistine," David told Saul. "I'll go fight him." "Don't be ridiculous," Saul replied. "There's no way you can fight this Philistine and possibly win. You're only a boy, and he's been a man of war since his youth." But David persisted. "I have been taking care of my father's sheep and goats. And when a lion or a bear comes to steal a lamb from the flock, I go after it with a club and rescue the lamb from its mouth. If the animal turns on me, I catch it by the jaw and club it to death. I have done this to both lions and bears, and I'll do it to this pagan Philistine too, for he has defiled the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the claws of the lion and the bear will rescue me from this Philistine." Saul finally consented. "All right, go ahead, and may the Lord be with you." Notice where David's confidence lies. Yeah, he mentions he defeated the lion and the bear, but he says this key statement. He says, "The Lord who delivered the lion and the bear into my hands will also deliver this giant." And you see, that's how faith works. The Lord helps you through faith to get small victories. And once you've conquered that, you move on to the next thing. And you realize, man, the same faith it took to accomplish that small thing is the same faith that's going to get me through this bigger thing. And it just keeps progressing like that. It doesn't really take any more faith to defeat a bear than it does to defeat this giant, this Goliath. And David knew that, and he understood that, and that's why he was able to achieve victory. So Saul tries to give David some armor. It doesn't fit. He doesn't want it. So he's just going to go out, with his little staff and his sling, and he's going to face the giant. In verse 40, he picked up 5 smooth stones from a stream and put them into a shepherd's bag. Then, armed only with his shepherd's staff and a sling, he started across the valley to fight the Philistine. Goliath walked out toward David with his shield bearer ahead of him, sneering in contempt at this ruddy-faced boy. "Am I a dog," he roared at David, "that you come at me with a stick?" And he cursed David by the names of his gods. "Come over here and I'll give your flesh to the birds and wild animals," Goliath yelled. David replied to the Philistine, "You come to me with the sword, spear, and javelin. But I come to you in the name of the Lord of heaven's armies, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. Today the Lord will conquer you, and I will kill you and cut off your head. And then I will give the dead bodies of your men to the birds and wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. And everyone assembled here will know that the Lord rescues his people, but not with sword and spear. This is the Lord's battle, and he will give you to us." As Goliath moved closer to attack, David quickly ran out to meet him. Reaching into his shepherd's bag and taking out a stone, he hurled it with his sling. And hit the Philistine in the forehead. The stone sank in, Goliath stumbled and fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with only a sling and a stone, for he had no sword. Then David ran over, pulled out Goliath's sword from its sheath. David used it to kill him and cut off his head. No wonder this is one of the greatest stories of all time. What a great story. A story of courage, of faith, of God coming through. Just an amazing moment in David's life. This moment literally defined the rest of King David's life. This was a monumental moment that changed him forever. I mean, no doubt he had tremendous faith, but after this, David would probably never doubt again who his God was and what his God can do. David went on to be one of the greatest warriors that Israel ever had, defeating the enemies of God, fighting and warring and leading in battle and obtaining all these victories for God in Israel. He was a mighty man of war, but it really began here. This is where he got his confidence that God would be with him in those battles. So a few quick points I want to make about this story. There's really two things at work here that we need to learn and see from this story. Those two things are preparation and faith. Okay, and these two things are what work together for David to have this tremendous victory. Yes, he had faith in God, but he also had tremendous preparation. And you have to have both. David spent years as a shepherd boy being prepared for this moment. It was no mistake that he fought the bear. It was no mistake that he fought the lion. Those were years of preparation that were preparing him for this moment. Had he shortcutted the preparation, he never would have been prepared to fight Goliath on that day. So he submitted his life to that preparation process, and that's why he was ready to fight Goliath on this day. And this is one reason why many people do fail when they go to take on their own giant, because they read a story like this. It sounds super romantic. It sounds super exciting. Yay, David did it. I can do it too. Let me go face my giant, and then they get their butt kicked. So the question to ask is, all right, you want to face your giant like David did? Well, let me ask you this. Are you willing to prepare the way that David prepared? When I see David's life, I see a life of preparation, a life in preparation, submitted to God, being prepared, being trained for this moment. You can't just read a story like this and jump and go, oh yeah, I want to face my giants too. Okay, what you can start doing though is you can start training and you can start preparing. You can start submitting yourself under the mighty hand of God and letting Him work in you the things that are necessary in order to defeat that giant. So when I see David's life, I first of all see a life of preparation. This was not a haphazard thing. He'd been training for this for years, and he knew it, and he realized it and knew it in that moment. I believe there was a moment where he saw Goliath, and it all came together for him. He goes, oh my gosh, God's been training me for this moment. I'm ready. I'm ready for this. So the first element was preparation. The second element is faith. So on Sunday, we just finished up a series called Unmovable that's all about faith. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on faith here, but I just want to make this point. How many that were at camp in the army of Israel hearing Goliath for 40 days, how many, if you could pose the question to them, hey guys, how many of you have faith in God? Raise your hand. How many of them would have raised their hand? They know they're serving the same God David is. These are all, good Jewish boys that have been taught the Bible, etc. How many of you have faith in God? They probably would have all raised their hand. But the difference between their faith and David's faith is that David's faith directed his life and his choices and his decisions. He didn't just say he had faith, but it had no bearing on his choices or his decisions. His faith matched the choices and the decisions that he was making. And I'll say this about real faith. Real faith will always direct your life. Real faith will always affect your choices. Real faith is not just something that you speak out of your mouth. If you really believe what you say you believe, your choices will look different. Your decisions will look different. Your life will look different as a result of that faith. And if it doesn't, then I would say, and I believe the scripture would agree with me, that it is no faith at all. That is not real faith if it does not affect your choices and your decisions. This moment where David killed Goliath, this defined his life. From this point forward, this moment forever changed who David was, who David would be, who he would be as king, how he would rule as king. This moment was a defining moment in his life. It was where, in a sense, he discovered a new side of God and a new side of himself. So this was a huge victory for David, but God was not finished with David yet. He was still not quite ready to be king. There was some more training, some more testing that David was going to have to go through. We're going to get into that next week.